The history of the end of poverty has just begun. The decline of global poverty is one of the important achievements in history, but the end of poverty is still very far away. The Reverend Thomas Malthus asserted that poverty is inevitable. It has appeared that some human beings must suffer from want from the inevitable laws of our nature. These are the unhappy persons who have drawn a blank in the great lottery of life. Writing in the 18th century, it is understandable that he came to this conclusion. Poverty was such a persistent reality in humanity's history up to then, that it was unimaginable that it could ever be different. However, in the 2 centuries since Malthus' death, we have learned that he was wrong. The deep poverty of the past is not inevitable. Economic growth is possible, and entire societies can leave the widespread poverty of the past behind. Let's look at one of the societies that have achieved this. 2 centuries ago, the huge majority of people in Sweden lived in deep poverty. Every 4th child died, and close to 90% of the population was so very poor that they could not afford a tiny space to live, some minimum heating capacity, and food that would not induce malnutrition. From the late 19th century onwards, Sweden's economy increasingly adopted modern production technology and achieved the productivity gains that made economic growth possible. A century ago, Swedes were still poor, but the majority had left the very worst poverty behind. Today, the poverty line in Sweden is set at about $30 per day. The strong economic growth in the last century made it possible that most Swedes are living above the poverty line. Sweden is one of the countries that achieved large growth and thereby proved Malthus wrong. The 3 distributions show how most Swedes left the deep poverty of the past behind. Other high-income countries adopted poverty lines similar to Sweden's poverty line of $30 a day. And, as documented before, the size of social care payouts and proposals for universal basic incomes are also around $30 per day. The share in poverty in any country depends on 2 factors. 1. The average level of income, and 2. The level of inequality. Some countries reduced inequality successfully, and thereby reduced poverty. Lower inequality in the future can further reduce poverty. But because the average income in the majority of countries in the world is much lower than the $30 poverty line, strong growth is necessary for global poverty to decline. The world economy needs to increase 5-fold for global poverty to substantially decline. This is in a scenario in which the world would also achieve a massive reduction in inequality, and inequality between all the world's countries would disappear entirely. Therefore, it should be seen as a calculation of the minimum necessary growth for the end of poverty. A 5-fold increase in the global economy is certainly not easy to achieve. Still, it is also not impossible. It is what the world has achieved in the last 5 decades. The climate researchers of the IPCC expect even more growth for this century in their sustainability scenario, the scenario in which the world is most successful in avoiding climate change. That all of the worlds will live on more than $30 a day might be hard to imagine right now. But then it's good to remember that today's reality in high-income countries was also entirely unimaginable very recently. The final chart summarizes the global history of poverty. It focuses on the last 2 centuries, when humanity left the stagnation of the past behind and achieved growth for the first time. The world made good progress in the last decade. The share that lives on less than $10 per day has declined by 10 percentage points, but the chart also shows that much progress is still needed. 62% live on less than $10 per day, and 85% live on less than $30. The global data clarifies why the world needs much more growth to end poverty. The world today is in a situation not so different from Sweden a century ago. The majority of the world left extreme poverty behind, but is still far poorer than $30 a day. Even after 2 centuries of the global fight against poverty, we are still in the early stages. The history of global poverty reduction has only just begun.
If you like our contents, Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to our channel.